One of the surprising things about Christianity is how long it took us to come to Christmas. Because in the early centuries, Christianity didn't celebrate Christmas, which is astonishing when you think now that most people think that Christmas is the most important feast of the whole Christian year. But in the early centuries, Christians didn't, it's not that they didn't bother with Christmas, they just didn't think of it even. Easter was what they celebrated. It's like if you read St. Paul's letters, you'd certainly know that Jesus Christ was crucified big time, and you'd know that he was raised from the dead, but of his early life and his birth, the only thing we're told is he was born of a woman. Well, there's no big surprise there. So Christianity comes very slowly to it, to the liturgical and, as it were, folkloric celebration of Christmas such as we've come to know it through the centuries. What they did was they read back from Easter. See, what you see in Easter is the power of God working through powerlessness. I mean, you look at the figure of the crucified Jesus, who is hanging as an executed criminal on the cross. It is an emblem of absolute powerlessness. And yet what we say is that through that absolute powerlessness, an absolute power of self-sacrificing love enters the world. So at the heart of Christianity, there is the vision of a power that works through powerlessness. And the epicenter of that is Easter. Now, they read back from that to a baby lying in a manger. Now, babies are extraordinarily needy little things. They are powerless. And what Christianity came to see was that in this newborn child who needs everything done for him, who can do nothing for himself except scream and sleep and the things that babies do, that in that baby there was in flesh, and again a baby's a very fleshy thing, in flesh the omnipotence of God, the power of God. So in that sense, Christmas and Easter are very, very close. And there's a great painting by El Greco. It's one of his marvellous crib scenes. He did a few of them. But the one I think is magnificent in a special way is the one where the child is in the crib, but the shepherds are worshipping, but the way the painting is done, they seem to be raising the cross over the crib. The shadow of the cross falls across the crib. And Matthew's story of Christmas is a dark story of that kind. Herod stalks the child. There are dark shadows in Matthew's story, not so much in Luke's story, which is much brighter and lighter and more joyful, and it's the one we tend to tell at Christmas time. But even in the New Testament, there are shadows that fall across the crib, and it is the shadow of the cross. For all of that, the celebration of Christmas has generated a most fantastic culture. I mean, Christianity came late to Christmas, but came with a vengeance. And when you think of the music of Christmas, it must surely be the most extraordinary body of music, just about, that the world has seen, at least in the West. But not just the music, the symbols, the tree came from Northern Europe. The gestures, giving of gifts. So in fact, the religious spirit of Christmas may have diminished, certainly has, but people still love the carols, they still love the tree, and they still give the gifts. In part, this is because Christmas is the most human of all the feasts. Every one of us gets the birth of a baby. It's something we can all identify. It's harder to identify with a man rising from the dead. Much harder. And then Pentecost with the dove, that's even harder. But with the baby, there's something intensely and touchingly human about it. And in the baby, what do you see? A God who looks at us and sees how needy we are, just like the baby, but who sees such possibility in us that he wants to become one of us in order to make that possibility real. I mean, this is astonishing what Christianity claims or proclaims, that God actually became one of us, embraced us in our weakness. When we might have expected rejection, condemnation, punishment, here is the God who takes our flesh, becomes one of us. Other world religions find this almost scandalous. And I can understand why. That God would inhabit the womb of a woman seems almost to them an insult to the divine majesty. But we say no, the truth of the divine majesty is the truth of a self-sacrificing love, and the essence of that love you see precisely when God takes our flesh and says the flesh is good, the creation is good, humanity is good. When there's so much bad floating around, that's an important thing to see and to say. And God sees it more clearly than any of us and says it more powerfully by becoming one of us. It's like a marriage. In a marriage we say the two become one flesh. And that's what happens when God becomes one of us. So in that sense, Christmas celebrates the marriage of heaven and earth. There is more, I think, to why it touches human hearts across the board. I mean, some people say, I hate Christmas. Usually what they mean is they hate the family reunion. But I think most people would say that they are touched by even those who are completely irreligious. There's something about Christmas that strikes a chord. And I think it's because Christmas reaches deep into human desire. What do I mean by desire? A desire that there be a love beyond fear. I mean, fear is the ancient enemy. Is there a love that is bigger than fear, that's beyond fear? That's a deep, deep human desire. Is there a peace beyond the violence? The violence we almost drown in. Is there a peace, in fact, that's bigger than the violence? And in the end, is there a mercy, a merciful embrace beyond all that is merciless, the mercilessness in which the world seems to drown? And Christmas, you see, says there is that love, there is that peace, there is that mercy. And that these are not a mirage, because that's our fear too. That all of these things are like a mirage, that just as you seem to be there, to have it within reach, it vanishes. It's no longer there. The power of Christmas is precisely its capacity to say over and over again through the centuries that these deep desires are not mirages. They are in fact what gives birth to genuine human hope in a world where there are so many false or cosmetic hopes. So Christmas, like Easter, at its heart is all about hope, the one thing the human being can't live without. If you read the story of Christmas in Luke's Gospel, you'll see something rather strange, and it's this. Luke's not that interested in recounting all the details of the physical birth of the child. When he comes to this momentous birth of the Messiah, all he says is, she gave birth to her firstborn, wrapped him in swaddling clothes and put him in a manger, a feed box. That's all we're told. You'd expect much more drama and detail, much more glamour and glory. But then he shifts the camera immediately out into the fields. He's much more interested in the shepherds than what's going on in the manger. It's strange, isn't it? But why does he do that? because he's interested in the human response to the birth, not just the birth itself. It's not just the fact that Jesus is born. How do you respond to the birth is Luke's question. And it's a question for us too, each time we come to Christmas. How do you respond to Christmas? Songs, yeah. Symbols, yes. Gestures, yes. But is there something more? The answer has to be yes. And what is the more? To become in the world as God has become in the world. For God to take flesh in us, the church. For us to embrace all that's human in the midst of all the mess. Don't walk away. Don't just punish. Don't just condemn. Don't just reject. But embrace. Get down into the mess, and with the merciful embrace, and even entering into that powerlessness that the merciful embrace always entails, know that there is a power that works through us, So for us to respond to Christmas and genuinely to celebrate Christmas is to say yes to the call that Christmas makes every time for us to be in the world that we know what God has always been, the God who is one of us in mercy.